All right, thank you guys so much. We're continuing our Seeing Through Gebser series. I apologize that I got this to you a little late this week. A very big life changes expecting, especially next week. So just a little busy. I do apologize. But if on this edition, of Gebser, we are on page 215. Now, last week we did, of course, the soul's death poll. I want you to take a shot in the dark as to what we're going to be discussing in this week's video. The soul's life poll. Well done, genius. So this is going to be another kind of longer video, so let's just get right into it. Having entrusted ourselves to the flight of the soul, perceiving some interrelated aspects of an unsettling and confusing rather than clarifying nature, we would now venture out onto the sea of the soul. This manner of speaking may be discounted by the rationalist, for he will also be skeptical of the phenomena under consideration. This is important, this next line. It is not our intent to awaken the slumbering irrational latencies, but rather to reveal the broad zone within us and in the world pervaded and dominated by the effectivity of these images and interrelationships. Beautifully said. We're not negating the irrational. We're using rational to balance the irrational, and the irrational to balance the rational. Very simple. Beautiful. And we would recall our observation at the outset of this chapter that the overwhelming and confusing energy and effectiveness of this irrational world of images demands from us our utmost vital, psychic, and mental discipline to maintain our detachment from it. We can, however, survey these images and their interconnections without submitting to their spell if we remember that many of those described have today been divested of their numinous content because we have learned to regard them in conceptual terms. So in many ways, you're seeing how rationality can actually benefit, because without the rational knowledge, which of course, as we learned a few videos back, rational knowledge of a numinous experience extracts the meaning and the numinosity of it. So in many ways, that's a good thing, because without that, we'd be overwhelmed by these images and we would just devolve into deficient mythical consciousness structure. Because we learn to regard them in conceptual terms. This is interesting. So this holds true, of course, only for our waking state and periods of awareness. For the moment we surrender our attention, we are afloat amidst the images and unable to account for them. Images we regarded only moments before as mere pictures or passed over in our minds. So these images appear to us in dreams. This is why I say start a dream journal. Those have a numinous effect. Why do they have a numinous effect? You are not. Rationality relies on waking consciousness, which is not a bad thing. But we're sleeping, so we don't really have that, do we? So that's where the dream journal comes in. That's where the symbolic images and dreams, that's why they're so powerful and resonant. The more clearly we recognize them and admit the validity which is their due as symbols vividly revealing our constitutive powers, repeat for emphasis, the more clearly we recognize them and admit the validity which is their due as symbols vividly revealing our constitutive powers, the greater our guarantee of insight into that segment of our lives outside our mental wakefulness. So mythology, symbolism, you have to give it its due. It's part of what constitutes you. It is important. If you ignore it or try to negate it and push it aside because that's irrational nonsense, it will come back with a vengeance and destroy you. This is why rationalists get very frustrated very easily, including me. I also have that problem. Sometimes, I get frustrated and you get a temper. Maybe if I was a little more in tune with my emotions, that would stop happening. But I can't do that because they're irrational nonsense and poetry's dumb and mythology is just stories. Such insight will also show to what extent our wakefulness is constantly pervaded by daydreams and associated reveries, for even during the clarity of daylight, our wakeful mental consciousness is not continuously effective. You know how I know the mythical consciousness structure is incredibly potent and powerful? Because even when it's not in its wheelhouse, it still manifests. Even in waking consciousness with rationality, we daydream, we think about ninth grade Justin wondering what I would do if a shooter came in and I would save everyone's life and get the pretty girl, all that stuff. That's how powerful it is. It even infects our waking consciousness. We meet up with the life pole of the soul and its water aspect whenever we utter the word soul itself. Soul, or German Seele, S-E-E-L-E. Oh, by the way, there's going to be some mispronunciations of some words here. I apologize, as if that's anything new. So we have seal is a word common to the Germanic languages. Its basic form is Saiwalso, or perhaps silo, Saiwalso, or perhaps silo, Saiwlo. The exact origin and kinship are still unclear. It was previously associated with the word sea, very important. Although the Brothers Grimm here dispute its semantic, if not phonetic, derivation, recent scholarship has shown it to be correct. Now, what we're going to be doing in this, remember last time, the death bowl of the soul is something related to air. So it could be breath or the lack of it. It could be a sail, but most commonly, as we can recall, it was a bird, a winged bird that can fly off. Now, in this, we're going to be analyzing how water becomes that polar complement. So death pole is the bird, life pole is water. We would note further the importance of this derivation of soul from the image of sea, for it provides at the very least an explanation of its polar complement. There is a mirror aspect immanent in the sea. Interesting. We may conclude from this that the soul reflects physical nature and is in turn reflected by it. So the reflectiveness inherent or characteristic of the soul is even characteristic of the sea. And soul derives from sea, which enforces our belief that water symbolism is the symbol of the life pole of the soul. We may conclude from this that the soul reflects physical nature and is, in turn, reflected by it, which gives the notion of the so-called unity of body and soul, which is also a polarity of body and soul, a certain plausibility. We're going to talk about. I'm sorry about my allergies. I apologize. I don't know if that's a shot at Descartes with the mind-body thing, but we're going to talk about the soul's polar complementary aspect and its relation with the world. We'll get there. The question as to whether the word soul comes from lake, der See, D-E-R-S-E-E, or from sea, die See, D-I-E-S-E-E, is only incidental. What is of interest here is that we once again encounter the ambivalent character of the life soul. If it is the sea, we have moving, active, and living water. If it is the lake, then we are speaking of stagnant, dead water, as described by Maurice de Guerin in his diary. So, there we go. Water expresses the same polar complementarity that the 2D flat circle does, which is, of course, the symbol of the mythical structure. We have the sea, which is raging, violent, always in movement, but also that, and then der See is that root word in which soul derives from, and then a root word pairing is lake, die See. Lakes are usually tranquil, still, calm, polar complementarity. What did Maurice say? In the ground of my very self are, I know not what, dead and fatal waters like the deep pond in which the poet Stenio drowned. This quotation recalls a fragment of Heraclitus. It is death for souls to become water. This idea must be deeply rooted in our psyche, for it is still at work today. Shipwrecked seamen do not radio the Morse signal SOL, save our lives, but SOS, save our souls. So when you're lost at sea, we can see another association and connection being made, save our souls. Now, of course, we can see exactly the failures of rationalism. We're taking save our soul. Yeah, we can't measure that. So that doesn't exist. Now we're going to do save our ship. What do you think is more profound, a ship or a soul? There you go. Why don't you ponder that? When we are faced with drowning, our reaction and utterance, as in all decisive moments of life, emerge from the origin of our inner depths. This save our souls still distinctly echoes the ancient Greek equation of life and soul that is inherent in the word psyche. Yet the quotation from Heraclitus, it is death for souls to become water, seems at first glance to express precisely the opposite of our contention, namely, that water symbolism expresses the living aspect of soul's life pole. And I'm glad he said that, because when I read that first, I thought, I know, the rationalists, yada, 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 contradiction, dualism, yada, yada. That still does seem like the opposite of what he's saying. So he's going to address that. Here we again observe the ambivalence. But another fragment of Heraclitus affords a resolution. But water proceeds from earth, and from water, soul. If the soul is born of water, it must not drown therein, for that would be a reversion to the unborn state, to death. So we have earth, water is born from it, and the soul is born from water. If it goes back to water, drowns, dies. Above all, we must emphasize that water is the primordial element, in all of the very ancient representations, and the statement of Heraclitus may be considered to be among the very first precise formations in language. Even in rational terms, this can be understood. For we know that the earth in its earliest state, as recounted in Genesis, was completely covered by water. The first forms of life, the first organisms, were aquatic. Even the embryo is surrounded in the womb by amniotic fluid. So we are seeing this very clear connection between water and life, whether it's the embryo being surrounded by a liquid, whether it's what do you say? The earth in its earliest state was completely subsumed by water. The first organisms were of aquatic. Fascinating. And all the organic life went forth from the waters. On the basis of scientific discoveries at the time of the First World War, Marcel Proust could state that it is said that the saline fluid in our blood is merely the survival of the primordial sea element in us. I wonder what he wrote that. Probably was In Search of Lost Time. I'll never read that. I want to, but I just cannot imagine ever being like, yeah, I'm going to read 3,000 pages. Yeah, that sounds good. In this connection, we should also call attention to Sigmund Freud's paper, The Oceanic Feeling, in which he records that the recollection of the primeval sea, and thus the primordial soul, repeatedly manifested itself as the basic element in his patient's dreams, a movement which he appropriately named the oceanic feeling. So in psychology, of course, the deeper you go down, according to Freud, the godfather of psychology, all of a sudden he started hearing all these symbols and all these images and all these connections with water. And he described it as the oceanic feeling. Why? Because water is associated with life. The extent to which these notions and sensations correspond to the primeval events, The extent to which these notions and sensations correspond to the primal events present in the pre-mental state of awareness can be inferred from Bakoufin's summary remark in his Matriarchal Law, 1861. This is some weird stuff we're about to get into. There he notes in his discussion of the vowel a or a that it is the vowel of water, dominant in Latin aqua, Sanskrit apa, and German Wasser. He goes so far as to consider this a or a to be the materia prima, the aquatic birth sound, the beginning of the saga of the world. So a is the vowel that is the water vowel. It is associated with water. Well, if everything comes from water, it all began with water. Why would A be connected to water? Because the alphabet begins with A. Everything follows from A, the first letter. Interesting. Now check this out. We might add that this A is still echoed in many words for blood, as in English, or in French sang, and Spanish sangre. The accuracy of Bakoufin's interpretation is borne out by the many designations for rivers in Switzerland and elsewhere, such as the A, A-A, Ak, A-A-C-H, Ak, A-C-H, Ake, A-C-H-E, from Old High German aha, water. For example, the rivers A in Engelsberg, Sarn, Vagatal, and even Livonia, and also by the many names for settlements situated on rivers such as Arau, Aachen, Fulda, and others. Fascinating stuff. This is why I love Gebser. He just gives you weird stuff that's like, if it wasn't coming from him, you'd almost be like, this is stupid, this is ridiculous, but it's interesting. It's fascinating. So we're actually almost done with the life pool of the soul, which is interesting, but we're not almost done with the video because we still have to connect the dots. Okay, he says we cannot claim to have exhaustively examined water symbolism here, for such symbolism, corresponding as it does to the nature of water, is inexhaustible. We have, for instance, made no mention of cosmogonic accounts, deluge traditions, Stygian waters, which are streams of forgetfulness and recollection, nor of the extensive realm of baptismal and initiation symbolism. Joseph Campbell covers that in the Hero with a Thousand Faces. He talks about the water symbolism that's used in Christian baptisms. We have passed over the Christian as well as Islamic and Mediterranean traditions with conceptions which are closely tied to the symbolism of the soul's life pole. Despite this, the powerful role of water should be evident. Water is an element in which the dynamic, energic moment is equal to that of air. So we're seeing this. So remember, air is the death pole symbol. It is an element, and according apparently scientifically, water, of course, is also an element and is equal to that of air. Polar complementarity. Don't privilege the life pole over the death pole. That is an understandable mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. Don't do that. You must balance these things. It is an element which corresponds to the symbolism of soul and enters into a natural relationship with the soul or precipitates its inception. When we consider the enduring effect of the soul-revealing, soul-depicting element, it would seem that water is one of mankind's traumas. Very interesting. In conclusion, let us cite yet another fragment of Heraclitus. Souls, however, emerge as vapor from dampness. Anyone who considers this far-fetched should recall Goethe's verse in Faust, which coincide with the words of the fragment. And when the pure moon rises into sight, this is Goethe, and when the pure moon rises into sight soothingly above me, then about me hover, creeping from rocky walls and dewy thickets, silver shadows, phantoms of a bygone world, which allay the austere joy of meditation. Surely we too may be permitted a glance at the assuaging images of the soul, and perhaps be entrusted with the task of transforming them, so that they may recast their twilight into crystal, or like crystal, become transparent. For this reason, we have endeavored to view them in a form which corresponds to their nature. Now that their contradictory nature, as seen in mental terms, and their mutually complementing polarity in psychic terms, have become transparent to us, we must in turn contemplate the soul as something self-complementary. I've been saying that too much. It's starting to freak me out. Whereby one pole suspends or complements the other and renders the inconsistent consistent, permitting its mysterious and sheltering character to shine through. The secret and sheltering aspects of the irrational, which is something irrational, unrational, and as such indivisible. Boom. Beautiful. Let me just take these out real quick. All right. So now we're just getting onto the symbol of soul. We took the two poles separately, but we did that for a reason. We made it clear, hey, we're not going to learn a ton we're going to learn enough. We're going to establish a foundation or baseline. So when we put it together, it'll make sense, but don't just go one or the other. Remember, two poles. So you can do the life pole and the death pole. Just if you're lost in the death pole, just remember the life pole. Don't pretend that's all there is. Don't be Arthur Schopenhauer, okay? If the two words deed and death, tot tod, are for us today primarily antithetical, we also know that they reveal the two complementary poles. Thus, the word pair reflects the life and death poles of the soul, for which we were able to establish a series of various symbolizations. Many of these openly bear the stamp of not yet retracted projections. Others are patently recognizable as analogues of the primordial processes of nature, and still others appear simply as accidental speculations, that is, reflections of an undirected image world. Whatever we may think of them, these symbolizations share a common trait. They make visible the effectuality of the soul and still retain this efficacy today in one form or the other. That is the beauty of mythology. That is the beauty of images, the beauty of symbols. They make clear the effectuality, that is to say, the profundity and resonance of the soul. And let's see. In doing so, retain that efficacy. It is a constraint or a tie back to the soul, which is a necessary and profound aspect of the human condition. Equally important, their efficacy is such that never is only one pole activated, even if negatively, quote unquote, the other pole is also active. So when you're dealing with a polar phenomena, once you hit one, you will hit the other. So you need to be careful. If you activate one in a manner that's immoral, misguided, or unhealthy, you best believe that the other one will come back with a vengeance. So keep that in mind. And it's also important to remember that Gebser says all psychological aspects are 2D polar, baby. This means that they continually act in tandem as complementary powers, flowing into each other undivided by any boundaries. These are relationships which require less quote-unquote sight on our part than contemplation, as these matters are more difficult to depict than to envisage. This psychic or mythical structure was earlier the proper domain of the poets, and it is not fortuitous that the co-presence of the life-death poles is only rarely expressed or symbolized in imagery. So sometimes when you're trying to convince someone, or even just trying to come to an understanding of something, getting the picture of it, that comes from mythical structure. I think you could probably see why. It's important. It's profound. I remember in one of my college classes, it was some class about like images and marketing or something like that, and it was saying that an effective image or an image is understood or processed 1,000 times quicker than any sort of logical abstract stuff, and it's also 1,000 times more powerful. Maybe not 1,000, but it was a lot more, many times more powerful. So just kind of keep that in mind. It's important to master, so to speak. Don't get too lost on the rational stuff, but to incorporate and integrate all aspects to make us more full humans. In the exceedingly vast literature on this subject, we find very few pictorial representations. Of the few, we have selected 3 as illustrations. The oldest is the Chinese Tai Chi, figure 36. Now I want you to take a random shot in the dark. Which symbol I'm about to show you. You've never heard me talk about this before, almost to an annoying extent. There is a reason why I say the yin and the yang. It is the perfect symbol. You've got it. As a matter of fact, my sort of unofficial intellectual master, John David Ebert, and I actually kind of disagree on this because he looks at this symbol and he says it never really hit him that much. It hit me like a brick. I saw this when I was a kid, when I was in 3rd and 4th grade. It meant nothing to me. I thought it was a stupid drawing. But now that I understand what it's hitting at, yeah, every time I think, am I being a little too rational right now? Am I pulling down on one? Just think, polar complementarity. It confers unity, psychic unity. It's beautiful. In accord with our mental consciousness, our reproduction shows this Chinese symbol for origin oriented to the right side. In China, it is always presented with the light for us, right conscious side, toward the left, and the dark for us, left or unconscious side, to the right. So there's an inversion there. It is a prototypical symbol, expressing in a complementary way the polar powers, dark as well as light, yin and yang. Now, of course, I mentioned this before, but notice in the black, there's a little white dot. In white, there's a little black dot. In life, there's death. Death is life. A true symbol always encloses 2 complementary poles, Gebser says. It is always ambivalent, ambiguous, and indeed polyvalent, particularly if we focus on only one of its values or poles. We cannot avoid this ambiguity in our successive presentation of the polarity of the soul. The ambiguity is inherent in all psychic articulations, even when we consider only one of their possibilities. The oracular answers of the Delphic Pythia express the same ambiguity which is latent in all psychically tinged manifestations. Consequently, our individual presentation of both poles must have had a similarly ambiguous effect. So it's probably a little confusing when you take them one at a time. When you separate the yin and you just focus on it without the yang, it's going to be a little more confusing. That's why we're putting it together now. The Tai Chi itself expresses this ambiguity. Each half of the symbol contains the other pole, the dark containing a light spot and the light containing a dark one. Darkness and light, in other words, are not just complements of one another, but seen in itself, each also contain the other. By the way, for you philosophy guys and trying to get something from nothing and nothing from something, you've made a fatal mistake. You will never be able to do that, and they are complementary poles. They ground each other. You would not have a conception of something without a conception of nothing, and a conception of nothing without a conception of something. Trying to sector them off and trying to understand one through the window of another, that's textbook rationalism, my friend. You have made a mistake. The soul's death pole, which we have found in symbolic form in the imagery of air, flight, birds, and the moon, forgot about the moon, always symbolically included the death pole, just as the soul's life pole, symbolized predominantly in water imagery, includes the death pole. Only when we proceed, he made a mistake here. The soul's death pole, now what he's trying to do here, he's saying, remember what I just said, the white with the little black, black with the little white. He's saying the soul's death pole, which we have found in symbolic form and yada, 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 always symbolically included the death pole. Yeah, I know the death pole included the death pole, Jean. Yes, even I am smart enough to know that one. And I know he made a mistake because he said, just as the soul's life pole includes the death pole. I guess maybe I was a little harsh there. No, I take it back. I think he made a mistake. Only when we proceed from their complementarity and not from the individual poles, recognizing in each pole its polar complement, will the true symbol and self-complementarity of the soul be revealed. The soul as a fusion of 2 complementary events is thus always ambivalent and becomes ambiguous when we regard only one of its values. We must not forget that the word symbol comes from the Greek verb symbalo, S-Y-M-B-A-L-L-O, meaning to roll together, join, unify. Every symbol is laden with two main possibilities, which, rationally speaking, are antithetic. Only in psychic terms do they form a complementary whole. This complementarity represents only a psychic and thus always ambivalent unity. Unquote. Seen in this context, the obvious circular, self-enclosed, energic field of the Tai Chi is one of the consummate representations of the mythical world image and, consequently, of the psyche. So, yes, perfect symbol. When you are having psychological turbulence, stare at this and don't conflate symbol with symbolized. This is a symbol. It means nothing without its corresponding symbolized. Think about what this is symbolizing, not just the symbol. It is a graphic expression of the fragment of Heraclitus quoted earlier. Hades and Dionysus are one and the same. It is further illuminated, why are Hades and Dionysus, hell and goodness, or whatever it is, let's say heaven and hell, why are they one and the same? Because they're polar complements. One is in the other's in. There's a unity. You cannot have one without the other. I apologize for being repetitive. It's so important. You have to get this. It is further illuminated by yet another of his fragments. Life and death are in our lives just as in our dying. The dark and, in a rational sense, barely comprehensible nature of these fragments becomes clear when we examine them in terms appropriate to their domain. In this instance, the mythical realm. This is important. For all you philosophy guys out there, when you read Heraclitus in your class, you need to put aside the rational stuff. Employ the mythical consciousness structure and say, Professor, you have made a mistake. When he says life and death are in our lives, just as in our dying, he is not referencing the triangular pattern, my friend. He's referencing the 2D flat circle. This is an expression of polar complementarity that is correct, by the way. It only becomes incorrect when we insist on using rational mode of thought on this irrational mode of speaking. It's absurd. In the view of the Tai Chi, where light and shadow, life and death, Hades and Dionysus are visible as homogeneous psychic energies, where the divalence appears as an unusually distinct polarity, the words of Heraclitus certainly seem to be not dark, but rather twi-lit, T-W-I-L-I-T. We're getting lit here, boys. Let's see. Precisely in the case of the Tai Chi, if we ascribe to it this more encompassing sense, can we see to what extent an authentic symbol is an efficacious originary element, a preforming and primal paradigm of being, with a capital B, beings with a lowercase b, and what is already formed. In short, the whole of reality. There we can see, I'm going to repeat, we can see to what extent an authentic symbol is an efficacious originary element, a preforming and primal paradigm of being, beings, and what is already formed. In short, the whole of reality. Like all original symbols, it is in all likelihood not just pre-human, that is pre-mankind, but pre-Tellurian, emerging from a quote-unquote time when the Earth did not yet exist, from the pre-terrestrial time alluded to in an apocryphal, I can never pronounce that word, saying of Christ, I chose you before the earth came to be. I think what he's saying here, whatever spiritual space, if you'll excuse my rational spatialization, I'm just trying to make it clear for you, the spiritual world of origin, the domain of origin, that most likely is where these symbols appeared from. They appeared before man, they appeared before earth. They are originary elements that express the whole of reality because they derive from a domain that is the whole of reality, including the spiritual and origin in our physical world. Beautiful. We point to this origin since it is customary today to interpret or locate symbols and symbolism in a rational way, as though a symbol, though unbound to space, could be ascribed to a particular location. So yes, I understand the Chinese Tai Chi the Chinese may have been the ones who discovered it and really kind of got the ball rolling on it, but it doesn't belong to them necessarily. It does not belong to them because symbols are aspatial. So why in the world would I tie a symbol to space? That doesn't make any sense. That's rationalism. Since symbols do not originate in the mental structure, it is wrong to interpret them in mental terms, as happens in any attempt to explain the occurrence of the same symbol in various times and places by a process of migration. Gebser says, no, 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 no. Migration's bullshit. Don't give me this shallow rational crap. Migration is already a space-time conception commensurate only with the mental structure. It is not applicable to the symbol because symbols are not spatio-temporal at all, but originary, and as such would be pre-spatial, pre-temporal, and perhaps even pre-archaic. Okay, so when you see these primal symbols, primordial symbols that are so efficacious and that have affected the entire human species, like this symbol has, this is coming from origin. That's where this is coming from. This is coming from the spirits, my friend. And you trying to locate it to China, and then the Chinese immigrated in this time, and then they transferred the symbol over to the Vikings or whatever. I don't know. No, that's bullcrap. We're not doing that. For this contention, of course, no rational proofs can be furnished. Demonstrable knowledge, that is, the rational mental capacity alone, is not sufficient to reveal this presumed truth. To reason, such expressions appear twilit, or possibly as hyper-illuminated. Twilit, if they are rooted in the mythical attitude. Do my freaking things stick together? My goodness. They're rooted in a mythical attitude and have a definite psychic irrational emphasis. Hyper-illuminated, if they are grounded in an attitude that has mutated from the previous structures and acquired an apsychic irrational emphasis. In this too, it will become clear that the new mutation can open up quote-unquote new interconnections to our consciousness. This is fascinating. There is a silent law according to which anyone who perceives certain interconnections cannot merely contemplate them with impunity. In other words, when certain of these interconnections come into our purview, they begin to affect and oblige our consciousness. That was me ever since time has kind of become in here. It's just like boom, like it's just in there. It was just like that's why I did my "What is time" video. I was just obsessed. I felt compelled. I could not stop. But when I read that, I was like, yeah, I know what that's talking about, baby. So that's probably what you did too. If you found this effective, yeah, you probably realized, oh, this guy's right, and now I can't stop thinking about it. The emergence of such interconnections is, after all, for the structure under consideration here, a coming into view of recollection which demands a complementary externalization and includes a vital action or deed. Or, restated in rational terms, our estimative knowledge about the given invisible interconnections is insufficient unless it is transformed into living knowledge. Estimative knowledge makes itself known to us conceptually, living knowledge via experience. So we have the abstract conceptualization, which is fine, by the way, not a problem. Not only is it not a problem, it's a huge benefit when moderated and balanced. We have conceptual knowledge, estimative knowledge. That's the world of rationalists. That's fine. And we have experiential knowledge, the direct a unity, an unbeknownst realization of unity, that is to say, of the self with all the aspects of the world in a present circumstance that you're dealing with. Experiential knowledge, which could be the soul, or magic stuff, pre-rational, irrational, that's experiential, whereas mental is estimative. These two divided from each other and placed in a dualistic opposition are useless. These are polar complements. They are useless without each other. Without experience, actually we'll get into it. And every experience as a psychic process is a traversal of the sea, as well as an externalization of inner knowledge relocating itself in consciousness. Let's see. Okay, yeah, I was going to go off, but we'll get into it. At all times and in all places, many and diverse ways have led to the living. Okay, let me go back a paragraph. Today, those of an exclusively rational turn of mind resist the necessary act of integration, that is to say, integrating the world out here. This is why I try to impress upon you guys. You guys need to get out of your head. All of you anarcho-capitalists, all of you communists, all of you guys with these pie-in-the-sky theoretical things, you are not living in the world, my friend. If you are an anarchist, you cannot. If I ask you why anarchism is true and why we should follow it, you're going to point me to theory. That's nice. I want examples in the real world of it working, either right now or in history. If you can't point me to that, we're done, because you have sectored off. And if you do point me to one thing, and you say, okay, we'll do the other way. So you say, No, I don't want experiential knowledge. That's bad. I only want to do theory. I'm an anarcho-capitalist. Great. What if you went the other way? What if I said, oh, look, I have something that works? And I said, okay, well, what about this? And you simply cannot engage with me in theory at all? No, get out of here. Because I don't know what works. What works is just based on nothing. It's just based on what you feel. And what you feel is important, but it needs to be balanced by rationality. And rationality is important, but it needs to be balanced by what you feel and your internal. So it's very important. The rationalists need to integrate the world. I'm going to do a kill rationalism on this because it affects it doesn't sound that bad, but once it starts to infect politics, it gets really bad. We start to see some real problems. So get out of your head. You need to use all the things in your head to balance the external and have the external balance the internal. Very important. At best, they will use understanding where, to employ a metaphor, they should act only with the heart, with the moderation and tact which are oriented to the heartbeat and not in such a way as to force understanding onto the heart. So sometimes it is better, as Gebser says, to act with the moderation and tact which are oriented to the heartbeat. That moderation and tact which are oriented to the heartbeat, that's something you feel. This is something that is intuitive. This is something that is felt. This is not something done through logical proof or abstract conceptualization. The best that you're going to do is, as he says, and not in such a way as to force understanding onto the heart. Engage with the heart on its own terms. I'm not saying forcing understanding on the heart is inherently a bad thing, but you just can't do it exclusively. Understanding cannot achieve the requisite integration. Reason would be more likely able to achieve it, for despite its affinity to understanding, it has not lost its connection with the heart, whose measured pulse it is still able to sense. At all times and in all, that's another one, by the way. Reason seems to be like a measured, balanced version of rationality. I have no problem with that. Reason seems to be okay. It's probably not perfect. It's probably got some flaws, but sometimes I see the rationalists, they try to argue against, and they just take either pre-rational, irrational, or irrational systematizing, and because it seems like a system, they just attribute rationality to it. And they go, look, it's reason. Rationality is not that bad. And I'm like, no, it's a category error. At all times and in all places, many and diverse ways have led to the living knowledge of the soul's polar complementarity, yet we must not mistake this biunity for the unity of the soul, since such unity would require something opposed to it. The Chinese numerical symbolic interpretation attached to the Tai Chi recognizes the polar self-completion of the soul and strongly emphasizes the notion that the number one cannot be associated with the Tai Chi. Why can the number one not be associated with the Tai Chi? Why do you think? Our description of the mutations which have taken place has taught us not to impute to psychic events a magic unity, which of course one would be it. Two would be the mythical, right? Two poles. Can't have one. They're more made whole rather than unified. The psychic realm, being itself polar, forms in turn a pole to the physical. So the psychic realm is polar. And you have to remember, Gebser originally started out as getting into psychology. He was a student of Jung. So he does know what he's talking about in this. The soul and the body, in their mutually conditioning and complementing tension, have the same relationship to one another as space and time. Bodily space and the spatialized body are materialized time and materialized soul, which require the formation and rigidification of space and body for the unfolding. So all that exists in space, spatialized body and bodily space are materialized soul and time. If you watched my recent What is Time video, time is not 3:29 p.m. on whatever. Time is an intensity, an energy. So it makes more sense, understood as an intensity or energy, why body and bodily space and spatialized body would be manifestations of time and soul. They must rigidify for their unfolding. The acute energy of the soul corresponds to the latent energy of the body. Soul and the energy of the soul corresponds to actions of the body in the world. When I'm doing things, I'm consoling my crying nephew. I'm doing whatever. That started out in the soul. I'm yelling at someone. I'm being mean to someone. That started out here. One is the latent form manifesting the other, and the measurability of space and body corresponds to the immeasurability of time and the soul. Interesting. So the measurability of space, which of course is the realm of the rationalist, and body, this is where they're efficient. This is where, yes, we should be rational. It is quantifiably measurable. What do you say? It's quantifiably measurable, whereas time as an intensity, not 3:30 p.m. bastardized as an extensity, as an intensity, and the soul, the internal, or even the domain of the psyche, are immeasurable. You can see the polar correspondence here. It is beautiful, isn't it? Whatever we can understand on the one hand, we must sense or experience on the other. So we must sense or experience something that first, and then, or I don't get too lost on sequence. We understand, we sense or experience something, and then sort of consolidate that experiential knowledge into estimate of knowledge. Then that estimate of knowledge is externalized. We get new data, new senses, and then boom, you can see the constant circle, constant flowing. This is healthy psychology and healthy soul, not rationalist nonsense. Whatever we can understand on the one hand, we must sense or experience on the other. And this sensing or experiencing is the living knowledge required to complement our calculative estimate of knowledge. Without this process and achievement, no life is capable of achieving conscious integration. We're actually going to stop there, but I'm going to do a point on that because so many people, I actually discussed this in one of my Kill Rationalism videos. It was about, I think it was my American politics one. Nothing can really be justified anymore. Basic things, experiential knowledge cannot be justified. Everything has to be justified through logic or through a study, which are both the domain of abstract conceptualization. So if I make a very, very, very basic statement that is wholly uncontroversial, if I say men physically are stronger than women, generally, of course, you're going to hear two things. You're going to hear one, I have a bodybuilder aunt, and my ex-boyfriend was scrawny, so therefore what you said is wrong. Or two, do you have a study justifying that claim? I do not need a study to justify that claim because I have 28 years of direct experience with the world. I also don't need a study saying my shin hurts. I don't need, sometimes experiential knowledge is very important. It is the realization of an unbeknownst unity. So yes, it can be difficult to assign a reason or to rationalize it. That doesn't mean it's any less valid. Now, it can't be the only thing. Right? Because if you do that, then we just do intuition all day. But intuition can be wrong. You can be wrong. Your intuition is based on experience that are always educated. There's always weird stuff. You can't just go on intuition and you can't just go on logic. You balance. Yes, yes. So that is to say, some of you guys just try to incorporate and integrate your experiential knowledge, whether it be magic structure stuff or even experience of the soul, the undergone experience of the soul. Either way, it's very, very important. You can't really achieve integral consciousness without it. So please have a new respect for the experiential. I'm not saying completely toss out abstract conceptualization. That would be absurd. But let's balance these things, people. So not everything has to be justified by a study. Not everything has to be justified by logical proof. Sometimes you make a statement that's just obvious, and it's obvious. Okay? It's very simple. I love you guys. We're actually stopped a little bit earlier than I thought we were going to, but that's okay. We'll continue next week, and then I have big life changes coming up soon. So I'm going to try to record some videos before that, and then within the month or two, kind of let those go out. But I want to preemptively apologize if the scheduling is a little inconsistent here. I just kind of priorities and stuff. But I love you guys. You're the best, and I cannot wait to see you guys next week. Thank you guys.